Welcome, folks who are here already. Looking forward to seeing a few more pop in. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Mia. I'm the founder of Designing with AI. And these events are to help creative designers, makers of all kind navigate the world of AI. We're learning together, we're experimenting together. And I'm really excited to have Colin and Adam here today, founders of Visual Electric, to share their perspective on where we're going and their unique experience. So I'm going to kick us off with some conversation and some questions, but if you have questions, please add it to the Q&A feature. If you drop it in chat, I probably won't see it. So use the Q&A feature if you can, and we'll hold some time for conversation and questions towards the end. All right. Why don't you guys just kick us off with a quick intro? Tell me a little bit about your creative path and how you ended up creating an AI tool.
Sure. I'm happy to start. I also just want to mention we have a third co-founder who is not here, but um, is actually the one who writes the code. So he's at his desk right now doing the real work.
It's always
Uh,
a partnership, right?
exactly. Um, so yeah, I guess I'll start. When I was a kid growing up, I grew up in Oregon. I always felt like a very creative person, but I didn't really have a great creative outlet. I wasn't good at drawing or more of the traditional arts. And then one day I got a computer and I learned how to use Photoshop, and it really changed my life in a big way. I learned how to make websites, and suddenly I had this new outlet for myself to be creative, and I could make things and I could share them with people. And that was a big deal for me because it ended up really setting the trajectory for my life. I ended up going to school for graphic design. I went to school at MICA, which is a fine art college in Baltimore, and then pretty quickly found my way into software. I really enjoyed the sort of technical aspects of software. It felt like a nice marriage of problem solving as well as being creative and sort of visual design. And then from there, I went to a startup, joined Facebook after that, worked at Dropbox, worked at a handful of other startups. Most recently, I was working at a company called Universe, which is a mobile website builder, like a Squarespace for your phone. And um, I was leading the design org there, which included the brand design team and the product design team. And I noticed that a lot of the designers were using, specifically on the brand design side, were using generative AI tools in their workflow. They were using it as sort of an early concept development part of the process. And when I looked at Dolly and Midjourney, it just was very clear that these were not the kinds of tools that were going to get wide adoption. And there just seemed to be an obviously missing tool in this space. And so that was enough for me. I would always wanted to start a company, and this just felt like it was going to have a big impact on the way, creative work and designers did their work. And so I left Universe, started Visual Electric, and raised just a small amount of money as a solo founder. Ended up meeting Adam and Zach, who Adam mentioned also happened to live in Marin. All three of us are in Marin, and yeah, we just hit it off, and we got to know each other in November of 2022, and Zach and Adam joined full time in January of 2023, and so that's when we really started in earnest building Visual Electric.
Hasn't been that long. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
It's just last year. That's a short timeline considering what you've built. So impressive.
Well, thank
Oh,
you.
thank you.
Yeah, we I think we had enough clarity early on around what we wanted to make, and I think that was really helpful for um, just kind of getting started. And I had been doing a little bit of customer development prior to Adam and Zach joining, so uh, yeah, we had a lot of direction early on.
And did you have a similar background as well?
Um, yeah, let's see. Similar but different. I moved out to the Bay about 10 years ago. I started at Apple. Had a truly wonderful time there with really creative people. And from there, met people that became my co-founders and early investors in my first company called Low. It was a similar company. It was trying to make machine learning simple and understandable for designers and those like kind of adjacent to designers. We spent about 2.5 years iterating. We went through like a bunch of prototypes and eventually landed on one that we were pretty proud of. We shipped it. And then we were bought by Microsoft. And so I spent about 2 years there, working out of the office of the CTO, continuing to iterate on Lobe. And then there were a few other projects that they had us take a look at. And after my 2 years there, I left. And this was in the beginning of 2020. And so it was kind of an interesting time to like leave a company and be thinking about what's next. And at the time, it's sort of hard to remember, but at the time, the like parks around here were closed. You actually couldn't hang out with friends. There was no, you had no capacity to do so, except by playing games. And I'm not much of a gamer, but my gaming usage definitely went up during those times because it was your only activity. And so I met someone, Jesse, um, and he and I started talking about like what would a camera for your what would a camera look like while you gamed? Like how would those two sort of interact? Like if you and I went on a hike right now, we'd probably like get to the top of a mountain, take a selfie. You have these like memories that you generate when you hang out with friends. But when you game, it felt pretty ephemeral. Like you'd have some funny moments, there'd be laughter, and then afterwards it's just sort of gone. And so we created Loki, which is trying to solve that. It would record your screen all the time, and it would give you these like fun ways to react to record your screen, react to the post, make little videos, post them to the site. And then we sold that to Niantic, which is the Pokemon Go company. Um, they've got this like beautiful office in the Ferry Building, and then I spent a lot of time in Japan. And then once I had done my time there, I started working with my friend Zach, who's the third co-founder Colin mentioned. He was the first engineer that I hired at Loeb, and he's incredible. He's a good dude, and also just an incredible engineer, and just honest and really enjoyable to work with. And so he and I started playing around with Stable Diffusion and generative AI as it's starting. We knew there was something to that technology and probably some design tool to be created. We weren't sure what, and we were just starting to play around. And around that time, we met Colin. So three of us joined forces to make Visual Electric.
Yes. Well, one of the things that really resonates with me is kind of a similar journey. And maybe this was like our age group where we kind of fell in love with making, we fell in love with the internet. And that in itself was kind of what's propelled us through our career, that curiosity, that making, not necessarily the art side of things, although we all have varying degrees of skill there. So I really resonate with that. So you mentioned something about playing with Dolly and those types of generators, and you noticed something was missing. What was missing for you when you started experimenting with them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first thing that was missing was just the canvas. I felt like the infinite canvas was clearly the right interface pattern to be using with this technology. It just seemed obvious that those two things should go together. You know, generative AI is such a powerful way to explore ideas, and I think the canvas really lends itself to exploration. And I also find that you know the chat metaphor sort of presupposes this linear nature to creativity, which just doesn't feel true. And like you don't have a starting point and an ending point. You have this sort of multi-branching journey that you go on, and you might explore a path and discover that it's a dead end, and then you need to kind of back up and go to where you were before, and then branch off of that point. Or sometimes you just want to pull in reference material and have inspiration imagery sitting alongside the thing that you're working on. And all of those things feel very natural when you're in a canvas and feel very unnatural when you're in a kind of conversational interface. Um, that was the biggest thing. I think the second category of things that felt like they were missing was describing a picture with words just strikes me as being very awkward and difficult to do. I think a lot of people became designers or visual creators because they're visual thinkers. And forcing those people to then express an idea through language just felt like a clumsy and awkward interface. So, obviously, that is the nature of the technology. Like these large models have been trained on image label pairs. And so, at the core of it, it is sort of text to image model. But there's also been a lot of work, both done by researchers as well as work that we've done to try and find visual ways of prompting models. And that's the inspiration behind things like our collaging tool or the sketching tool that we just released. We're also allowing people to create their own sort of custom styles through building mood boards and then turning those mood boards into styles that they can use to generate new images. So all of these are kind of in service of that goal. How do we allow people to create things in visual ways?
Okay, so there's so much in there. I'm going to come back to some of those.
Yeah, some of
You
that.
talked you mentioned the nonlinear creative process, and that chat is definitely driving a particular format or way of thinking, but also prompting I think does too, right? Like in itself, there's one prompt, and in fact, when I post things lately, everyone wants to know my prompt, and I'm like, well, actually, I can't tell you the prompt for this image because it was a nonlinear process.
Mm.
I iterated so much. I inpainted, I did all these things, which is true for almost the things that we create in our traditional tools, right? We can't say, here's the one way I got here. And so I'm curious, knowing that the creative process is nonlinear and that these tools are evolving and getting more sophisticated, what do you think is going to happen to prompting over time? Is it going to look the same, different? How does that change our process?
I think that what do I think? I think that, have you put well, I don't know if anyone's played around with Collage Tool, but if you haven't, you should go to visualelectric.com and play around with it. I think that gives a pretty good indication of the future. There's obviously still going to be text, and sometimes it's really helpful to describe, like, here's a person and they need to wear a hat. But after that, you might not know what type of hat you want them to wear. You may not know the like angle you want them to be like facing the camera, and that using text just gets you a starting place, and then you iterate from there. And if you were to like look at a timeline of how much time someone now and in the future will spend, you just have a little bit of text at the beginning and maybe a little bit spread throughout, but you're spending most of your time thinking visually about what you and reacting to what you see.
Yeah.
I would just add to that, um, we think of image generation, it's really a search problem. If you think about the latent space of the model, it is technically a finite space. I mean, it feels infinite because there's so many combinations, but you can think of it as a finite space, and typing in a prompt is really not that different from searching Google for something. And so really the question is, how quickly can you get to the place that you're trying to go? And I think text is a really great way to sort of take big leaps in terms of trying to get to the part of the latent space that you're interested in exploring. But once you get there, refining that and getting to the sort of specific image that you're trying to create, or in the future, music or video or whatever it is that you're trying to create, text. Um, I think there's going to be much better tools for that more fine-grained control. And I think that's a big theme from what we've heard from customers, and the thing that we're focused on is giving people more control. I think that's one area that we've heard over and over, and it's really a limitation from current tools.
Mm.
Yeah, the experience is very similar to a problem that we had at Pinterest, which is, for people who were making things in the real world, whether it was a home DIY project or whatever it was, they may not have the word for that couch, that style of couch, but they know what they want. When they see it, they'll know it. And so it really is a search problem. If you don't have that vocabulary, and even some of the most sophisticated creatives have, a good vocabulary, but it doesn't mean they have the vocabulary for every single thing they want to create. And suddenly your creation is limited. And so that's why I love things like the ability to do the mood boards and exploration and nonlinear process, because if we're limited by our vocabulary, then of course the things we create is going to be, a lot of people talk about an AI aesthetic. Yeah, there's a default AI aesthetic out there because of the limitation around that vocabulary. So how are you helping creatives find and refine things over time?
Just to respond quickly to what you just
Oh,
said, you just reminded me of, when I was in art school, one of the things that we had to learn how to do was give each other feedback, and it was critique. And critique is a very different skill than making. Like, there's people who are exceptional makers and really bad at giving feedback, and vice versa. So, I think, I've been a designer, I've been a manager, and one thing I've learned is that as a manager, your job is to, in large part, give people feedback. And part of that is vocabulary. Part of that is like having the right words to sort of describe what you want. But part of it is also knowing what it is that you want. And those are just separate skills entirely from somebody who might be sort of intuitively making something, reacting to things like you're saying. I'll know when I see it approach to creating. So I think, yeah, I think we're the skill set that's going to enable somebody to be really great at using generative AI to create things is just going to be, I think, much more similar to, say, a manager than it is going to be somebody who is a creator, because you ultimately are less connected to the work. You're giving constraints and you're giving guidance, but at the end of the day, you're not the one who's actually producing the thing. The machine is, and it's just a totally new and different skill set.
I bet the community is going to have a lot of feels about that statement. Right? Like, there are a lot of conversations we've had about, is this going to take away our connection to craft? What does this mean for the people who just really love to get into the details? All of those. And there's lots of them. I've worked with lots of them versus those of us who are better at scoping the project and talking about what we want to create and, refining the scope, all of that sort of stuff. What does it mean for our discipline? Like, if that's where we're headed.
I mean, maybe that'll change. I don't part of I should couch that statement with, like, this is where I see the technology today, and part of that is just a limitation of, like I was saying earlier, how much control you actually have. Like, I find that people who have really specific ideas of what they're trying to create often will be more frustrated with the tools because the clearer your vision is in your mind, the more difficult it is to actually get the AI to produce that. The people today who I think are having the best results are those who are more open to the serendipitous nature of generating things, and they may have a general sense of what they're trying to create, but they're also just open to what kind of emerges. So I don't know. As somebody who cares a great deal about craft, I mean, this is something that we've definitely thought about and talked about with the team. Um, I think craft is kind of an evolving definition, and I think uh, people who were hand making furniture, the idea of craft to that kind of a person, they may look at furniture that's made by a machine and say that that's like, oh, this is the death of craft. But I think people who are really exceptional industrial designers and really great at working with sort of the mechanized process of production, there's just a whole different type of craft that's involved in that. And I personally believe that the craft will never go away. It'll just sort of continue to evolve and change in terms of what that means and how the technology requires craft. But to me, craft is all about just taking care in what you're making. And I don't think that will ever disappear. At least I hope it doesn't.
I hope not. Sure. It's just the tools are gonna change to
Yeah.
help us get there. That's what I'm seeing, that's what it feels like. Um, but I don't think, as you know, the creative community, we have a lot of feel as a community. And some of the common questions that I hear from people is like, well, if I have to rely more on serendipity or, my content and the things that I make are generated on the shoulders of all these other people, right? So talking about training and where the material comes from, like, does that even make me a designer anymore?
Interesting. I think I mean, ultimately, we're not in control of this technology, right? Like we're participants in it, and we're seeing where things unfold. I think as a team, we're quite interested in seeing how we can bring artists back into the conversation in some interesting way. Um, there's more that we'll have to talk about this in the future, but we're actively trying to understand like what is an artist's role in sharing their creative work so that somebody else can collaborate with them and have some of that serendipity that you're referencing. And how can they participate more directly, both like economically, but also yeah, much more directly with the technology itself. I think it's pretty underexplored, right? Like what that relationship looks like. And I think we're going to be one of the teams to pay more attention to that, and everyone else will.
I, yeah, I think, I mean, these models have largely been trained on data scraped from the internet so far. And there's a whole question of, is that legal? And should that be legal? Um, I think that you can kind of get into the philosophical argument around what is creativity? Are we all just, you know, individual neural nets that have been trained on some amount of data in the world? And when we produce things, how much of that is coming from materials that we've seen throughout our life? And what does it mean to create something original or something new? I personally am of the philosophy that everything is derivative in some way, and that creativity is really just about combining existing ideas in new ways. But then I think there's a more practical argument, which is, we have all this amazing artwork, all the imagery and um, all this data that exists in the world. Some of it is available on the internet and can be used with or without permission from the people who made it. But I think a lot of the best data is not on the internet. A lot of it is sitting on people's hard drives, and um, and we know that data quality is the single most important driver of model quality. And so I think there is an opportunity to create a model that incentivizes artists and the sort of, people who own this data who want to share that in a way where other people can use it. And I'm also an optimist. Obviously, I wouldn't be working in this space if I didn't think that this is going to be good for the world. But um, I recognize that with big sort of technology changes, there are, vested interests that are challenged, and change isn't comfortable, and it causes people to have to adapt. But I think any time that we're sort of enabling more people to express themselves and be creative, I think that's sort of a net positive force in the world. And I think I personally believe we're entering into a renaissance of creativity where individual people are going to be able to make things that would have required a multi-million-dollar budget and large team of people to have created in the past. And I think we're going to see individual people making Hollywood quality movies. And I think that's extremely exciting. I think we're going to see people writing books and telling stories that would have never been able to have been told before. And so, how do we enable that is the question we're asking. And how do we do it in a way where artists and creators feel good about that happening and they feel like they're being properly rewarded for their contributions to that? So, that's obviously like a big, thorny question and has a lot of difficult things that we'll have to answer, but it's one that we're personally very interested in trying to answer.
Yeah, I mean, for the folks who know me, I spent most of my career in technology and as a manager, as a leader. And then I started a design department to help other designers become great leaders and managers. But I started designing with AI because when I started using these tools, I felt more creative than I had felt in a really long time, right? It opened up something that I hadn't experienced in my entire career. And so I have to be an optimist that we're going to figure this out because to your point, like I think there's something coming around the corner. I can't wait to see the stories and the things that people make from this. But there are these really hard questions. And so do you have any advice for the folks who are using your tool or other tools on how to navigate those questions, particularly, really tactically in their work? Can they, should they use those outputs?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very individual answer, I think, in the short term. Um, I think over time, collectively, we're going to come to some sort of consensus on what is and isn't appropriate. And I don't know that there is a clear answer to those questions yet. One area that feels like a good application for AI, both given the sort of limitations of the technology and also these kind of thorny ethical questions, is just in the concept development part of the workflow. I think there's a lot. I mean, I think designers and creators are used to working this way where they will pull in reference material, they'll talk about sources of inspiration, they'll, create mood boards. And I think we've already all collectively agreed that that's a totally fair and legitimate use of other people's work, because when you're in that inspiration gathering phase and you're trying to figure out both how you're similar and how you're different from references. And I think AI is really great at that. It's really good at helping you explore ideas. It's really great at helping you iterate through a bunch more concepts than you would have been able to um, previously. And it can also sort of bridge the gap between maybe a mood board and what will end up being sort of the final production. Um, Instead of having to kind of hand wave and say it's a little bit of X and a little bit of Y, imagine Z, you can just show Z. So I mean, that's an area that we're definitely paying a lot of attention to. Um, but obviously, this technology is going to keep getting better. And to say that it will only ever be limited to like sort of the concept development part of the workflow feels a little disingenuous. I think we know that it's going to push its way into sort of the production stage and higher fidelity. So hopefully, though, we'll have enough time between now and then to kind of answer some of these questions.
I definitely see the difference in your tool as providing that space, right? Like, so that generative canvas was kind of like a, oh my gosh, thank goodness it's finally here. From a creative standpoint, because I don't know about you, like I have folders and folders of crap I've generated and it's terrible and it's miserable and it's unorganized. So that was the beginning of saying, like, oh, I can see how this fits into my process. It feels familiar, it feels good, but it still has limitations around scale. Like for a single project, I might generate hundreds of images. And there's ethical questions about that too. But like I might generate hundreds of images. Like, how are we going to manage the scale in which we can generate? Any ideas?
Yeah, we've heard a lot of people asking about this. I mean, even just keeping your canvas organized, I think, can become a big challenge when you're generating hundreds of images. So I think there's like probably some easy things we could do in the short term to help with that with our product. But yeah, I mean, this is a technology that sort of encourages um, just tons of production, right? Like you're just dealing with sort of an order of magnitude more volume of assets than you would if you were producing things by hand or collecting imagery. I think it's going to present some really interesting design challenges. I think figuring out the right interfaces for handling and managing and organizing that data. Um, to me, I'm excited. Like that's why I'm so excited about this space is that it kind of feels like one big like interface design problem. Like how do we like we have this crazy alien technology that sort of appeared out of nowhere, and now we're all poking and prodding at it and trying to figure out how to use it. And there's no sense at all of like what this interface should look like. And we're that's the question we're trying to answer as a team. Is like what is the how do you steer a model? How do you collaborate with AI effectively? And so yeah, certainly like organization is a big part of that. And I don't have a great answer right now, but it's certainly something that we're thinking about.
A lot of people have been, complaining to me and saying like, well, I can't use this yet. It's too hard. I don't want to go to Discord. I don't want to use Stable Diffusion, right? All these complaints, which I get. And my response has been, we're in a technology race right now, not a product one. But y'all are the first product I use that I was like, it feels like this is the beginning of the product race. Do you think that's true or are you taking a different approach?
No, I'd agree. I mean, I think that 2024 is going to be the year of wise. I think we've got the technology has asymptoted a little. It's matured, and now what we need is not necessarily more technology, but we need better UIs.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a lot of room left to travel on model quality. Like we know that we still get images back with multiple limbs or formed faces or hands and like um but that actually feels more like an optimization problem now. And like we have this sort of general ability now to create images, and so we'll just keep making that better. But yeah, the bigger kind of unanswered question is what are the ways in which these UIs actually or these this technology shows up in products that make sense to people. And um, yeah, I think we're seeing that across a ton of different verticals. I mean, we're obviously very focused on the creative image generation space, but I think you're starting to see that in many different areas. And yeah, and I would echo Adam's point. Like this year and probably the next couple of years feels like where the product layer, the application layer is going to reach a level of maturity, and these things are going to start to actually appear um, in work, in our daily life, and not just among early adopters, but sort of the early and late majority of consumers as well.
The product design nerd in me is very excited. I can't wait to see new interaction paradigms, new ways of engaging and experimenting. And I'm sure that y'all will be at the forefront of that just based on what I've seen so far. So, as you look ahead, what's next for Visual Electric?
Yeah, I mean, the big categories of features and capabilities that we're thinking about are speed. Like we know it's slow right now. It's painfully slow, and there's been some really exciting progress made in how to get sort of real-time generations. Quality and speed are kind of like a sliding scale with image generation, and so it's possible to generate things basically in real time, but in our testing, the results from that are not very good. So, um, but I do think that there's a time and place for it. I think in the beginning of the creative process, speed may actually be more important, and you just want to travel quickly through a bunch of different territories. And then when you find an area that you're interested in, you can kind of slow down and start generating higher quality things. So that's a big part of it. And then also just optimizing our um, compute and inference times. Like we're still learning about how to sort of get the best performance out of GPUs and how to handle the balance of like having enough GPUs available, but not spending too much money on unused GPUs. So there's some optimizations there we're making. That's one. I think control. I mentioned control before, but being able to control camera angle, control lighting, control depth of focus and bokeh, and like there's all these things that people want to be able to control, and words and language are again like probably not the most intuitive or the best interface for that. So introducing more ways of controlling your image and hopefully visual and more intuitive ways. Consistency is another big bucket of things like consistent styles of images, consistent characters, um, uh, products, like being able to like train a model on like your products and your likeness and then have those reproduce reliably across images. I think image quality is another big category. Like there's tons of research being done in the open source community around how to get better prompt adherence, how to just reduce a lot of the issues that we see and are very aware of with image quality. So those are probably the biggest buckets of things.
Sounds like an exciting roadmap.
Got a lot to do.
Daunting but exciting.
Nice and juicy. It's good. Um, do you have any advice for folks who are using your tool from a prompting perspective? Are there structures or techniques or things that you've noticed that are unique to your model that they should know about?
Hmm. Let's see. Well, we believe a good prompt is starts with subject matter, and then our prompt assist will help you fill in the rest. Um, and doesn't include any style information. We'd rely on what we call our moods to dictate style, and then you put in subject matter and location. Um, we also have create what do we call it? The like mood boarding, like create your own mood
Mhm.
product. It's a little bit hidden, but if you drag in some images, you can select them. You make your own mood board. You can select them all, and you can make a mood based on that. If you've got a particular style that you like to hit, so I'd start there. Like separate location and subject matter and style, and focus on those as like two separate problems to solve.
But in general, I mean, I think that with Midjourney and maybe Dolly as well, but really I feel like with Midjourney specifically, this culture of like prompt engineering has really emerged. And there's a lot of people who will talk about sort of in detail how to get the best results from your images. And I think we just don't subscribe to that philosophy broadly. Like we don't think that to be a great image creator or visual thinker, you need to become an expert in prompting the model. Like that feels to us like a bad interface. It feels to us like things that the technology should be doing for you, so you don't have to think about. So I think I think Midjourney has had a disproportionate impact on how people think about image generation broadly. Um, but we're kind of yeah, we're just taking a different approach. We don't want our users to become prompt engineers.
I mean, I agree, and I teach it to a lot of teams, but I think fundamentally it comes down to giving them a sense of control
Mm,
that Midjourney allows, sort of. But it's not that's not the skill that we need in the long run. What the skill we need to harness is the ability to communicate, not only through words, but other mechanisms, our vision, our idea. And that direction, that art direction, is really the most important thing. And so, what I like about teaching people to prompt right now is it helps them refine a skill that they sucked at before. And before, they just relied on their teammates to figure it out. Like I say, make it more playful. And both of you have different opinions around what playful is, but we've worked together long enough that you'll go and figure it out what Mia wants, right? Like, so we relied on humans to fill the gaps. We can't do that in the same way with models. I mean, they'll fill the gaps, but maybe not in the way that we expect. And so that disconnect, if we can close that gap with better tooling, with better interfaces, with better, I don't know what to call it, art direction mechanisms, like I can communicate a composition, but not very well with words. And so if I can draw that composition and put in some words, then we're going to get to a much better outcome.
totally.
I'm excited to see that evolve.
Uh, yeah, like I think there will still be critiquing, and there will still be like you need some method of getting the thing that you have in your head out on paper. But I'd love to see much more of that done visually and through UI than trying to figure out what the right words are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about how an art director would tell a designer how to, or the kind of feedback an art director would give to a designer, I don't know that. I mean, art directors, I think, have learned through years of practice sort of a vocabulary to express ideas with language. But I think oftentimes art directors also communicate through a sketch or through showing, hey, like, here's an example of something that to me feels more, whatever, silly or serious or whatever the emotion is. And I think there's so much more that can be communicated so much more effectively through these other mm, modalities that I think are much more intuitive, especially for visual people. So I think when we see people becoming really great prompt engineers, what we see is a problem that needs to be solved, and that's
Right.
an opportunity for us.
Yes, please. Because the thing, it's so obvious to me when I get a bunch of professional designers in a room and they can't put together a prompt that gets the thing in their head out. Like that to me, I know how talented they are. They have to be talented. But the fact that that interface doesn't work for them is everything, right? Like that tells you that, okay, there's a great opportunity. Y'all need to go build it.
100%. Couldn't agree
Is
more.
there anyone or any tool out there that you think is doing that well? And it doesn't have to be in the image space, but you think you've seen?
Mm, good question. I mean, I guess I'll just call out ChatGPT. I mean, I feel like there's a reason why ChatGPT has done so well, and I think that's a case where the conversational UI, I think, makes a lot of sense. And why has ChatGPT done well? I think one of the reasons, in my opinion, is that, and this is something that I think voice assistants historically have been terrible at, is you ask a question like, you know, who was the president of the United States? And they tell you, Siri will tell you the answer, and then you say, how tall is he? And they have no idea who you're talking about. And like this very natural thing that people do, which is have a conversation, which wasn't possible before. But with ChatGPT, it just works the way that people think and the way that people are used to interacting with each other. And so, that's why, I mean, it's a very human interface. And so, and it also it has context. You can reference things from previous parts in the conversation, um, and you can basically engage in the way that humans are used to engaging. I think that at a high level is what we're missing right now from the image space. Like we haven't had our Chat GPT moment where the right UI comes along and suddenly everybody's sort of able to make sense of this technology and use it in a way that's really valuable and helpful for them. And I think if you think about when ChatGPT came out, it wasn't actually a new model that they had trained. That was still using GPT 3.5. It was just a different interface. It was instead of the autocomplete UI, it was a chat UI, and so it is, I think, fundamentally an interface problem.
So the thing about solving the interface problem is that you then make generation more accessible. What does that mean for the future of design if our PMs or whoever it is can generate things that look like our deliverables?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is when people start to feel uncomfortable because there's, there's some amount of security when you have a technical skill that other people don't have, right? And so you become a bit of a gatekeeper. And I think there's power in that and there's security in that. But ultimately, I don't think those things serve us well as designers. Like if you think about when Figma was starting to get popular, I was like a late adopter of Figma, I'll admit. I was very skeptical of the idea of PMs being in my files and engineers being in my files. And I was used to, you know, my sketch files being in my on my computer and they only synced to Dropbox when I put them in Dropbox and nobody could see them unless I wanted them to. And it was this sort of siloed, walled garden protective mindset. Um, and I think that was ultimately, while it may have felt better to me at the time that I had that sort of power and that if the PM needed something, they had to come to me and I would design it and I had some sort of control I could wield when I designed that. I actually think design has really benefited from being opened up and having more people involved in the process and more people understand the value of design. And ultimately, what you're designing is better because there's more inputs. And some of the mistakes that I would make as a designer with my set of biases and things that were important to me, but maybe I was overvaluing, those things all were made better. So I guess again, I'm an optimist and I'm biased because we're building a tool in this space, but I just think that you need to embrace these things and the people who embrace them early on, I think will stand to sort of benefit from them the most. And so I would just encourage people to sort of face that uncomfortable feeling and lean into it because I think ultimately it's going to be a net positive force for design and creativity.
How would you encourage them to help their peers or maybe their reports do that? Because one of the things I commonly hear is, I know I need to help my team move forward, but they're afraid, they don't want to. How would you encourage them to get started?
Just
Design
jump in.
manager.
Yeah. I don't know. You mean getting started with AI tools or
Yeah, integrating generative AI into their process.
Go to
Like,
visualelectric.com.
nice.
yeah. No, I mean, I think we're collectively in a bit of an experimentation moment. I don't know that anyone has really figured this out yet. I think the people who are using these tools are doing so with the mindset of let's see how I can use this. Let's see how it's useful to me. And we've talked to so many customers across so many different disciplines, and one common pattern has been we're all just trying to figure this out right now. There isn't uh, yeah, I wouldn't assume that you're behind or that you are, you know, coming in too late or that somebody else has figured this out and that, you're gonna look foolish. Like, no, you may very well be the person who actually figures out how this technology can be most useful. And I think right now it's small ways. Like we're not gonna be replacing Adobe Creative Suite, you know, wholesale in the next year, I don't think. I think
Maybe
that's
2025.
yeah, exactly. We'll save that for 20. Uh, but we're looking for those ways in which it can start to show up in the creative process. What are the moments where it actually is 10 times better than what existed before?
Also, just add like a little bit of encouragement to your previous question about jobs and some anxiety. I mean, we've been talking a lot with photographers, for instance, and um, they're hired by clients. A client can go buy a camera. Like they take pictures for significantly less expensive than it takes to hire a client. But I think the skill you've developed that AI can won't take away is this sense of taste. in the sense of craft. And when someone's hiring a photographer, they're purchasing that. They're not purchasing the fact that he can click the shutter button. Same with something like an interior designer. The client will end up buying all the material. They'll place it throughout the home, but they're hiring an interior designer for the sense of taste. They've developed something that's quite hard to develop, uh, and that's what you're actually purchasing.
Yeah. I think we take it for granted as designers that we know what we like and we know what looks good. Most people don't have that confidence. Most people don't feel like they can look at a set of options and say, "Oh, this is clearly the one that resonates the most or it's the most effective." So that ultimately is our power and our talent. And I think we're trending in a direction where sort of technical skill is becoming less of a gatekeeper and it's more about taste and also storytelling. I think that's ultimately the role of a creative is you're telling a story. So focus on that. Like those are the things that are going to be enduring and valuable no matter what the technology is.
And generative AI just helps us get there faster, more effectively. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple questions, some from when folks registered and one from the Q&A today that are in a very similar vein. So I want to make sure I ask them. But Alejandro asked, and Laura is asking something similar. How can companies create images that follow their brand guidelines using your tool?
Yeah, it's that mood builder I mentioned earlier. Talk about product. This is fun. So clicked images, found imagery, or generate images in the product, um, drag them into your canvas, and then select all of them on the canvas, and there will be a create mood button in the right hand sidebar.
Mm.
So that'll analyze all the images. It'll try to pull out the important pieces, and it'll show you our mood builder with it all filled out. From there, you can edit it a little bit, but you should be able to make a mood that reflects your style, or reflects your brand.
I'll also say that like that product feature is sort of like a V.5 of what we're really imagining here. We're working on a more capable version of that, and we're actually looking for companies who want to help us figure out how that feature should work and what the applications are. So if you do have a company that has a brand, style that you'd like to be generating images in, reach out to us. We would actually love to partner with you, and we can work with you on training a custom model and helping you uh, sort of start generating images that you really can't generate uh, without going through the training process. Really.
I'll be sure to let people know. Um, One other question that folks asked, this was from Mira, I believe. Um, how do you mitigate bias when using your tool? Any advice?
Yeah, if you ask for like a photo of a doctor or something, like it's going to give you more times than not, like, a photo of a white man, and, like, that's just a known bias of the model, and it's based on all the biases of the training data that, it was trained on, so which is just the biases of the internet. Um, the best way is just to be specific about what you want, and the model can produce whatever you would like, you just have to ask for it, so usually biases show up in under specified prompts, I think. And that's obviously not a great answer. Like, we really want to have the default experience be less biased. And so that's also something that we're looking at, which is things, basically ways that we can inject more diversity into the prompt. So if you do underspecify the prompt, it won't kind of default to stereotypes, but it will actually help by default give you a more diverse output.
Really, there's two areas. There's the input that we're putting in, be more specific. But you also mentioned crit earlier, and I would say crit's a good time to like as a team go, hey, what bias are we seeing here? What can we avoid to kind of feed back into at least for now that
Yeah.
prompting cycle. Okay.
And you can even say things it always feels weird to specify race and ethnicity in a prompt, but you can put in keywords like ethnically diverse, and that will help you, get a better, more diverse set.
Just for fun, have you seen anyone or teams using your tool in a way that you didn't expect, that you were excited about?
Yeah. Um, we've seen a lot of people using it to make storyboards, which has been pretty cool to see. A
Mm.
lot of video work, either people generating images and then bringing those images into Runway, or generating images and then just creating like a sort of low fidelity, like, keyframe animation and doing like voiceovers. And that's just been really cool to see. I think the canvas really lends itself to uh, laying things out in a timeline and looking at things sort of chronologically, and just again going back to story. Like I think telling a story with images has been one of the things that we've sort of seen people using the product for, which has been really cool.
Cool. So in the last few minutes, I'm just curious, what do you hope for in the next, let's just say, year for AI? What do you personally want to see?
Good question. I mean, better UI. I mean, that's the thing we'll be focusing on. I think there's still a lot of work.
I think I just want to see more people adopt these tools. I think we're in this moment where I think the early adopter market is pretty saturated. I think a lot of the people who are, you know, interested in new technology and new tools have been using these tools for a while. I think we're at this moment now where the general awareness of AI is extremely high. Like my parents are talking to me about it, my family members who have no interest in technology other than using their phone, are talking to me about it. It's everywhere. So awareness is really high, but adoption is still really low. And there's really only been a handful of tools that have kind of broken through to the mainstream. So I'm really excited to see more tools break out, more people using these tools in sort of normal use cases and not um, just technology for technology's sake. Because that's when I think we're going to start to see real transformation of how work is done, how people communicate, how people express themselves.
I can see it. It's on the horizon. We just have to a few more iterations and we'll get there. So, well, I'm excited that y'all are building what you're building because, again, the first time I saw it, I was like, finally, like breakthrough moment of experience. And I can't wait to see the next iteration of the things that you build. And I just want to thank you so much for being here today and being part of the conversation. Unfortunately, our community is probably still stuck in the rain, but this recording will go out to them and I'm going to share and I'll follow up with you too shortly. So thank you for being here and sharing your perspective. And hopefully we'll all be making cool things with you soon.
Thank you, Mia. It was really
Bye.
great to chat with you. Definitely. See ya.
Bye, everyone.